Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia Jr., and with me, as always, is the roll with the punches, Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hi, everybody. We had little technical difficulties today, which was the first in our 150 episodes.
Exactly. And it only makes it that much stressful just because, as you're about to hear, we have a very, very special guest. So, Jennifer, why don't you do the honors and introduce our friend here?
Sure. As you might recall, our theme for February's episodes is the power of people in place, and we focus on the social aspect of real estate. And today we have the pleasure of being joined by South Miami Mayor Javier Fernandez, who is also an attorney and a good friend to us as a former House of Representative in the Florida legislature. So welcome, Mayor Fernandez. We really appreciate your being here and your patience with our technical glitch this morning.
Pleasure to be with you both. Always enjoy your company and happy to break new ground with you. Hopefully we'll set some other positive marks today other than your Wi-Fi crashing.
Absolutely.
Well, and I do want to thank you so much for your government service, because I know it's difficult. You can never please 100% of the people 100% of the time. And we're in crazy times in general, just in terms of the amount of information that's out there and how fast information, whether true or not, spreads. So I really appreciate all you're doing, what you did at the House of Representatives and now as mayor of one of the most booming cities, I think, in South Florida, which for us is very exciting. We have an office there, and I live nearby in Pinecrest, and I love to go to all of the shops in South Miami. So why don't you give us, before we get started, a little background on you, where you grew up, your family, etc., and give us a little peek into Mayor Fernandez.
Sure. Thank you. Well, first, it's an honor to serve, and it's an incredibly fun hobby. So luckily, I'm blessed to have the support of my family to do it, and can't do it with my wife and her incredible patience, Anna Maria. So thank you. She's watching. And to my kids as well, who allow me to share myself with folks outside our family. So grateful for that support, and obviously grateful to the two of you for your long friendship. South Miami, and me personally, I have the honor of serving as the mayor of a town that's going through a period of dynamic growth and change, and we're excited about that. For me, I'm a native Miamian, born here, son of two Cuban exiles. My mom was a public school teacher for 42 years. Dad was a line worker for Bell South while he put himself through college and law school. So that's my origin story. Grew up on the west side of town. Dad bought a home with a VA loan, brand new home on 137th and Coral Way when that was out in the boonies, and Coral Way was actually a unpaved road for the first few years we lived out there. So we lived on the edge of civilization for a good while, and now it seems like it's the center of the universe. So that neighborhood has changed quite a bit as well. Educated here locally, was able to go away to college and come back for a period and work, and took a long break between college and law school, working in affordable housing advocacy and development principally, and then for a local mayor here, the mayor of Miami at the time, Manny Diaz. So that's kind of my background. It's always been something focused on housing advocacy, the law, or local government. And so I think it's been the perfect career arc for me to kind of take on this challenge in South Miami and kind of hopefully shepherd it through a transition. We're trying to balance the old with the need to grow, and channeling that growth where it should be, which is in our town center, which we now call the SoMi District, organized around our Metro Rail station, the South Miami station, which is the organizing story of South Miami, right? We're the first depot south of downtown, founded in 1927, and now trying to build around that history as we kind of come into this new era for the city.
Great. So along that line, I know for years the Shops of Sunset Place was trying to get redeveloped at the same time by the same people who redid successfully, I should say, Cocoa Walk, Grass River. So I know that that's a project that's in the works. I also know that the city recently passed new transit supportive development district, which is more, I believe, to the west of US 1. Can you tell us a little bit about how that district came about and what the city's goals are in changing that zoning?
Yeah, so we have been fortunate to have, I would call, a very progressive zoning code, going back to the early 90s when Victor Dover kind of pioneered a form-based light code in South Miami. Unfortunately, the city didn't embrace that and really stifled growth through a series of rules requiring kind of unanimous consent of the board on any comp plan changes or zoning changes, and really it did not create an environment for predictable investment under that code. And frankly, wish personally that had happened, because I think the scale of South Miami would be very different than we're going to see today going forward, right? So I think we fail to appreciate when you don't invest or allow for investment to happen, over time, land becomes more valuable, returns have to be larger because the basis is higher. And so, if we talk about wanting to have cities at the scale of a Paris, 8 or 10 stories, or a London, right? It's hard to do that. The reason they exist is because to destroy that economic value that's been created over generations now, you're constantly weighing what exists versus what's not there. South Miami, for being an urban center near a transit station, has a lot of blank canvas lots, right? And so what's happened is the land basis has increased. And so we've seen now, beginning with the prior council, I joined the council in 2022 along with 2 other members. Prior to our coming on board, the city realized it needed to kind of liberalize the zoning envelope a little bit so investment would actually flow. And so a planning study was commissioned and shepherded by the Corradino Group. It culminated in the last 2023. We finally completed, or 2024, completed the enactment of all the regulations and the comp plan. And so in the areas around the transit station, we're certainly allowing for the densest development. In the areas other place, through a combination of bonuses and TDRs, you can get to a 10-story envelope in some locations, particularly south, on the south or east side of US 1 to 74th Street. That kind of just recognized what was already the new reality for South Miami, which is the Avalon Bay project, which kind of set the standard with that height, right? That was kind of became the baked-in expectation for owners in that area. And as you go north and west of the metro rail station, certainly there are pockets of intensity near the transit station where you can go up to 16 stories. But as you move north and west, obviously we're coming closer to single-family neighborhoods. So we start to taper down to a 6-story envelope and below. So, certainly we have increased the baseline density. That's an arguable point because we just didn't have a density limitation before. It was all floor area driven. We actually put in a 150 unit an acre cap on that to provide some more balance. We've reduced the lot coverage ratio to make sure that buildings are a little narrower, have a lot more openness to the street, but will be taller. So you'll experience the street differently, hopefully better with those new conditions. And that work, hopefully is translating into new investment. We're seeing the fruit of that already. Some long stalled projects went across some City Hall, sponsored by Alta Group, is now under construction. That'll be a 10-story multifamily building, authorized prior to us getting on the council, but we really helped kind of move it off of home plate into gear in terms of the construction. Avalon Bay, same story, stalled project, approved prior to us joining the council, but then a series of modifications to a development agreement really helped catalyze that and us shepherding it through that process. Avalon Bay is now doubling down on their investment in South Miami, bringing forward in the next 2 weeks, a project for the council's approval on the site of BT's, Einstein's, and Early Lane. And the great story there, and which I'd like the public to know, is that we are keeping 2 historic businesses by having them relocated into historic buildings on our main street that have really been underutilized, have not had a consistent tenancy. So the operators are excited about that, the opportunity to continue to be part of South Miami. We are excited to have them there. The owners that are selling the balance of the assemblage are keeping those 2 assets in portfolio because they want to be part of this transformation. And that really is what we're trying to strive for here, which is to honor our historic scale on Sunset Drive, as an homage to the past, while we allow the rest of the SoMe district to kind of grow and evolve.
And I love it because I really appreciate all of the boutique businesses that are, along both 57th and 72nd. They're different from what you find if you go to a shopping center or some of the streets that have been transformed into just, national brand name stores. So I like that you were able to do that and keep that flavor. I know it's also been hard for a lot of those retailers, to your point about the value going up and everything trying to still stay, small and local, and the challenges that they've had in staying there. So I think bringing in more density is definitely going to help, because although the rents aren't going to go down, just having more foot traffic should help increase their sales. So
yeah, Jennifer, and you mentioned something really important. I think South Miami struggled in the past because we tried to be too much like every other place in the market, replicating offerings that existed elsewhere. And if you look at what's been successful in South Miami, whether it's retail or food and beverage, it's not the national credit tenant type retail or restaurants, right? It's the little mom and pop Pasta Mias, the old Lisbons, the Recovecos, the now, Mano Libera and Grape Ape, and all these new offerings that really cater to the local market and are very different than anything you'd find elsewhere in this marketplace. Ease on Sunset, which has been a staple on our drive, or New Tweeds, right, which has just come online. These are very bespoke retail opportunities. And I think where Sunset Place, which you mentioned before, and I failed to kind of answer, struggled, was that it just offered more of the same. Everything you could find at Dayland or Merritt Park, without the segmentation for luxury, right, was present there. And really what happened was it just had no real unique space in the marketplace, and suddenly started to implode as, there are some conveniences to being at Dayland, right, which is free parking. And so that still drove a lot of choices for folks that could go to South Miami or elsewhere. So the future of Sunset Place is going to be much the same. It's going to be more of a mixed-use community. It'll have more bespoke retail. It'll have, personal services, lifestyle and fitness options. And hopefully that'll all create a nice texture that people will want to come experience and enjoy, but really supported first and foremost by new residential activations that will create kind of a native market in the SoMe district to support a lot of those new activations.
Well, and I think the fact, that you're so close to the University of Miami and you have a Baptist hospital there, you have all of the ingredients for a very healthy, vibrant city. And to your point, the only thing that was lacking was the density. The other thing that I think is really interesting about Sunset Place is as soon as I saw the design where they tried to keep all of their shoppers within Sunset Place, instead of having it be open to both streets, they're on this amazing corner, with US 1 and Red Road and Sunset, but they try to keep everything closed in. And I think opening that up so that there's a more natural exchange between pedestrians and shoppers is also going to help them significantly.
Yeah, and I think while we had a setback before with, the prior iteration of Sunset Place failing, I think long term, and it's a painful long term, and it's painful in the short term to medium term, right? Because we don't have that driver right now really helping to feed the rest of the district. But, the prior plan kind of retained a lot of the same defects that exist today. And that's because while we love our AMC movie theater that draws, more than 1.25 million people a year to South Miami. And as far as Homestead and Miami Gardens, if you look at our retail catchment studies, right, that's why the South Miami name brand is so strong. It's because the movie theater is a driver, and we want to keep them there. The format right now is so large that it's required this kind of interior facing arrangement. So the southern half of the property is really dominated by the organization of that movie use. And so I think the new developer's relocation plan to keep the theater will now liberalize the ability to have architecture, as you were talking about, Jennifer, that really relates to 57th Avenue, which is our main gateway into that part of our town center or the SoMe district, that relates better to Sunset Drive at a scale that's more humanized and consistent with the historic scale. So that's the opportunity that we have now. That's what the new regulating plan for that district that we've created kind of speaks to as well. And, that's the opportunity that we hope we'll get to all realize here in the very near future.
Yeah, I love that. I have a soft spot in Miami. Bougainvilleas was my first F&B lease, and I love seeing that it's still going strong. Some almost 30 years later. So
I think it's picked up a whole new vibe now. It's become the hotspot for UM students again. So there's a lot of activity on Wednesdays and Thursday nights, which we hadn't seen in a long time.
They're like a great rock band that it's almost like it's discovering a new audience, right? And it's really interesting to see that vibe as you're interacting with that space. It's phenomenal. And I think you were alluding to this idea of the character of a city like South Miami. I'm wondering, it feels like there is a shift in the mindset to be a part of responsible growth rather than just kind of, stopping being inclusive of that conversation. And so I'm wondering, where did that shift come from? Has it, sometimes there are things that happen in life that are negative on the outset, but it becomes the thing that triggers the action that is going to lead to a better future. And I think that that's what you were kind of alluding to in regards to Sunset Place. So I'm wondering, this shift, is that coming from the people that live in South Miami? Is it a shift from just you guys in governance? Give me a little bit of a sense of that.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story from the campaign trail, probably the best way to kind of highlight the issue. So, I'm in the world of development and in an odd set of circumstances, the gentleman who bought this property, Alex Padilla, through Midtown Equities, I put him in the category of a frenemy, right? I represented DDR, the mall owners at Midtown, when he bought all the residential pads, and we went to war for a couple of years over a project there. But through that interaction, developed a friendship and respect, first and foremost. And so when I was approached about running by a couple incumbent commissioners, I went and learned that he'd acquired the mall. I had a conversation with him about what he intended to do and whether he was really committed to doing something spectacular here. And I think he's honored what he represented to me thus far. But when I went to the street, because even though you have the potential for a good public-private partnership there where the government can work to be a facilitator and really get out of the way, first and foremost, of something positive, which was not the case before, you still need to have some level of public acceptance. And, I was knocking on the home of a resident who lives near All-America Park. It's a beautiful park that we have just north of US 1 in South Miami. And as I was talking to her about Sunset Place, she was very adamant against that prior height proposal, which was, I think, 16 to 20 stories. And I had begun, before I ran to testing with some polling, what there might be by way of acceptance in terms of maximum heights. And to me, in my polling, 25 stories, which was the historical reference point when the Bakery Center was permitted, had 65% support. So there seemed to be some openness to it. Now, when you got to 35 stories, it dropped about 25 points. So that was the range, I thought, of public acceptance. But she validated at the door when she said to me, I hated that height, but look at what's happening at Coconut Grove, and we missed the boat. And at this point, I'm open to almost anything as long as we get something good and something positive we can enjoy as an amenity in South Miami. So I think our challenge as a commission has been to balance that, right? Allow for growth where it's appropriate. And it's only appropriate in South Miami around our transit station, right? This SoMe district is our growth corridor exclusively. And we have, even though we've gotten some very, very well-designed projects, one recently on Manor Lane and 80th Street near US 1, those projects that encroach on neighborhoods are the tinderboxes that can light the fire for a revolution against what we need to do in the town center. So we've been very disciplined about keeping growth away from where it's not appropriate. In the case I mentioned, we actually went to the developer and bought the lot from them, so we can put it in our repertoire of green space on the underline. That was done both because we need the green space, because we are under-resourced there, but also because we could see that if we made a decision that could have galvanized 250 residents because they felt they were being imposed upon, right? What does it do to the momentum we're creating where it's more important around this town center? So we're trying to very, very directly balance, our long-term economic and growth needs, which requires growth in this town center, against what our resident quality of life needs. And the way we kind of struck the balance is we're going to protect single-family residences or neighborhoods at all costs, right? Including with interventions like the one I mentioned, while we support development and growth where it's appropriate, and that's near our transit.
You mentioned that you're under green spaced, and I find that interesting because South Miami does have, there's several parks that I can think of within the South Miami area. So how are you guys doing anything to incorporate green space into some of these developments? I know with the recently approved SoMe Walk, you have a public plaza. Is that part of the green spacing or not? Not really. How are you?
Yeah, look, I'm excited about SoMe Walk because the use it's replacing is just one of the worst uses that we have in the city right now, which is a hotel that generates more than 210 police calls a year. Just a lot of bad things happening on the property. So I'm grateful to Henry Pino and his investment team to bring that forward. I don't think that those public spaces are necessarily the standard that we want to point to as good quality urban spaces. And it became a point of our conversation recently as we discussed that a project last meeting, which I ended up voting against, sadly. But what we're trying to do is, we are revisiting some decisions of the past. We had, if you're familiar with the Marshall Williamson neighborhood and the old public housing site, that site has been intensified substantially. We had a publicly owned asset there nearby that we were intending to develop under an old CRA plan for townhome development, for sale townhome product for low-income buyers. We were, at the neighborhood's request, re-examine that issue. We're going to keep it in our green space inventory as a park. So we redesignated it as such. We're trying to acquire the legacy homestead for Marshall Williamson as well. That's an ongoing conversation right now. Actually, contracts out about that. And, where we can, we've been opportunistic in buying resources. But the truth is that land values in South Miami have skyrocketed. And so acquisitions for us are very, very difficult, both in terms of timing, terms, and price. And so what we're looking at is partnerships with our public partners, specifically the Miami-Dade County School Board, about improving their recreational footprints. So we've got 3 parks adjacent to 4 schools. Ludlam Elementary is adjacent to Bob Walsh Park. We've got South Miami Park adjacent to David Fairchild. And then the last is Palmer Park, which is adjacent to both South Miami Middle and South Miami K through 8. And the conversation we're going to bring to the school board is integrating our campuses so that we can invest in the recreational footprint of those schools, give them some enhancements that will hopefully help them with their enrollment currently, while we get the benefit of the use of that green space over a very long term. So we're talking about a 30-year lease agreement with them. We will invest through a bond program that the residents approved, probably in the tens of millions of dollars to basically expand our parks footprints and programmatic offerings in a way that leverages public assets. So we're not outlaying dollars for acquisition, but we're really investing in those public assets to just enhance the amenities that could be offered there. That's the strategy that we're kind of developing right now, and hopefully we'll get approved here before the end of the summer.
I love that because the parks are such an important part of that power of people in place, right? It's where the community naturally gathers, and people who might not normally see each other or cross paths are together at a park or at a farmer's market. Or I know you guys have the South Miami Art Show coming up, not this weekend, but the following weekend.
We also have our SoMe Second Saturdays.
Yep.
Check us out there on the corner of 73rd Street and I believe it's 58th Avenue. This opportunity, the school district, I'm really excited about for 2 reasons. One is we're leveraging this public asset in a way that allows us to kind of expand our recreational footprint and really hopefully provide our residents an unparalleled amenity suite out of other communities our size, certainly in Dade County. And then secondly, because, in this world where, sometimes very positive change, we've had more magnets and voucher programs, our schools have become in some ways very disconnected from the communities that they live in, where these were all neighborhood resource schools in the past. They've now become schools that draw people from all over Dade County because they're magnets in large measure. So if we can make our schools centers of the community again, I think that's a very positive outcome. We all feel more vested in them, in the students that are there, and into possible partnerships that create opportunities for both the community and students alike. So we are excited about that. We've, after a long history of trying to kick out the Girl Scouts of a park property that we own just across the street from Palmer Park, we've kind of reset a lease with them, and we're excited about in that new lease being able to open up a Pine Rockland hammock, give our residents access to it reforest it, be better stewards of that land with the Girl Scouts, not without them, and allow our, new generations of young women to kind of come here and also learn about the natural ecology and environment of our wonderful home here. And so these are the kind of opportunities that we're trying to tease out. They're not opportunities that we can execute on their own, but we're really trying to leverage our public and nonprofit partners to make a lot of this a reality.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that because my daughters got to enjoy that experience as former Girl Scouts. So I'm glad that they're sticking around.
Mine too.
All it took was bribing me with a few cookies. So
that'll do the job. You mentioned that you've always been a housing advocate. And when I first met you, I remember you lending your voice in support of the effort that Andrew Frey, who's now with the city of Miami, championed about small building development in Little Havana without parking in a transit-oriented corridor. Always appreciate you for that. And you also have a very unique perspective in having been a state representative and working from that perch and now being mayor of a local great city of South Miami. I'm wondering when new legislature comes down like the Live Local Act, right, that has to do with housing, but how is South Miami drawing the line between, local design standards and enabling needed housing supply? And I think your perspective is just very unique because you've been in that state legislature and now running the city. So your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll share this. When I was in the State House, there's a couple of my now local mayor colleagues who told me, Javi, please take these decisions out of our hands, right? We know we need to grow around these transit corridors, US 1, right? But the politics of it locally are just impossible. And so, I understand that, certainly sitting in my chair today. We've had one Live Local project come through. We've approved it. I don't think it'll ever be built. I think it was really a negotiating chip on the part of the owner. We haven't seen any others. I don't think we will. I think that's because people have a level of comfort that they can come to South Miami now and invest predictably. And so within the confines of what we are offering, they're finding enough of an envelope to realize, a reasonable return, and in some cases deliver to us a series of public benefits for green space, housing. They've got a menu of choices, environmental standards that we can enhance in terms of the built environment. So that menu is clear. The roadmap has been set. The leadership has been stable. And so I don't feel in my particular case that even though we've seen a lot of preemption coming downstream, that it's going to jeopardize our autonomy in the zoning space as a city. That said, I think Live Local has been positive in that it's kind of opened this dialogue about the need. We have a critical need for more housing units for all incomes. For those earning below 120% of I, the need is all the more critical. We need to produce units to bring down costs across the board, but we really need to deliver units for people who need them the most. I don't know if the legislation is hitting the mark on the goal of creating real affordability. I think it certainly has pushed the conversation in some positive ways. I think when going back to Andrew Frey, whose idea I appreciated, and one I tried to innovate on in terms of, the missing middle tax credit exemption, which now exists in Live Local. I was trying to pioneer some legislation that would provide the same, but for infill buildings, like the ones that Andrew was creating, because I think, there are a lot of small investors who would build affordable product if the process was less cumbersome, right? Fernando and Jennifer, that entitlements are very difficult to procure, right? And there's really no incentive to do it at a small scale. Live Local is targeting, projects that have 70 or more affordable units. Obviously, that's 40%. So your projects are in the hundreds of units. That requires a very different capital stack and intervention and impact on a neighborhood. But I think there are a ton of small infill opportunities that if the legislature got a little bit more creative, they could target accretive incentives, and you can get 15 and 20 units at a time in a way that's very contextually harmonious with single-family neighborhoods, adjacent small multifamily. And that's really the power of entrepreneurship that we need to unlock as a society to kind of help tackle this crisis, which it is a crisis because we're seeing our kids, this now generation of young professionals being priced out of opportunities here in South Florida, notwithstanding the tremendous economic and other opportunities that do exist here. And so that is our challenge going forward. I think, the other challenge of Live Local is that for cities that do not have a generous zoning envelope to start with, It's really hard to realize any new units in production. And those are communities I would say are choice communities. And so, I think South Miami in contrast to Pinecrest and Palmetto Bay, right, and Cutler Bay. Cutler Bay and South Miami probably could see more live local projects because we do have areas where we do have greater density or allow for it and a more liberal zoning envelope. So you'll see developers want to import those benefits onto eligible sites. Palmetto Bay and Pinecrest live local is a non-issue, honestly. And I think as a state and as a region, right, we need to ask ourselves, is that really the outcome we want? Do we want to concentrate more units in communities that are already accepting development? Or do we need to have development happening uniformly across the board? And do we need to think about another model that requires, jurisdictions to accept a certain amount of development that serves, the full complement of people across all socioeconomic cohorts? That's a conversation we're not having, right? But I think it's what we need to have. We're certainly trying to do our part. South Miami, we're excited about the redevelopment of public housing that's brought in a new cohort of individuals that are earning further up the income stream while preserving really needed public housing on a one-for-one basis. It's helped stabilize that part of our community. So I think this development can be positive, but we do need housing, in wealthier communities, whether it's Bal Harbor or Pinecrest, right? Where people that live and work in those neighborhoods and households there can be closer to work, right? That's the only way we're going to deal with our regional traffic issue here in Miami-Dade, is by reducing the number of trips, by creating opportunities for people to live closer to where they work.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned, it's sad that the city of Miami kind of gave up on this, infill development project. But the reality is that the proof is in the pudding. We had a lot of new projects that came up. And, I almost see it as, when they broke the 4-minute mile, then, the next year, 16 people broke it. And I saw that in Little Havana once the Tesela project, came up, Andrew Frey was trying to show that it can be done, proof of concept, and then all of a sudden we had 12 other projects that were basically activating these sites that were vacant and that were not a nuance.
Fernando, I think what we don't understand as sometimes as regulators or citizens is that the incentives are to hold vacant land, aggregate to do something larger, right? That's where the real returns are today. And so we need to create incentives either from a regulatory scheme or at the state level, that basically makes infill development happen, because it's ultimately, I'd rather have a 3-story building adjacent to my single family neighborhood than the threat of a large aggregation in a 15-story tower. And we should make it easy for people to invest in small projects because, cumulatively, there are a lot more of those opportunities and you'll get to the same result, right? Without the conflict in some ways. So I hopefully it's an issue the legislature here will take up and we can help them address it should they ask us.
Well, let me ask you something, Mayor Fernandez, because Jennifer and I have this conversation all the time. And I'm not going to say that this is a question that's specific to the city of South Miami, but just because you're so well-versed in these issues, why is the permitting and zoning department process such a hard nut to crack when it comes to municipalities, to streamline it, to modernize it, to create the ability to shorten those timelines and create efficiencies?
Look, it just takes persistent focus. These are not easy issues. I think one of the things we're going to try and pilot here in South Miami is, more AI supported reviews initially, particularly on the for construction drawings where you've got code standards that are very clear. On the zoning side, we can certainly, we need to, and we have tried to create in South Miami a process where you can get in and out of a system within a handful of months. I do work, not all over the state, but in different parts of the state. And I will tell you that, to get a rezoning done in Brevard County with a comp plan change, which I did for a client, took 4 months. And that's what they told me it was going to take. You file on this day and you can expect to get out of this process in 4 months' time. And, for my clients, that was an epiphany, right? And so what it begets is them looking for more opportunities in that marketplace. Contrast that with the city of Miami, where you're looking at an 18-month process to ask for and maybe get permission, right? You may not even get it at the end of that process. So it limits investment, which is not the only important goal, but what it does is it limits opportunities for interventions that really can serve the community. and conversations that the government can have with the developer about project modifications or, that may meet any number of local priorities. And so I think that's a challenge, but it requires consistent focus and a commitment to doing it. And, in a smaller city like mine, I think that's a little bit easier, right? We certainly, we have a lot of volume for our size, but it's not volume that's terribly overwhelming. And we are struggling with some of that. How much of it do we want to staff up for this moment? We don't want to create legacy costs that we can't underwrite in the future. So we're relying a lot on third-party consultants for a lot of the larger projects, for reviews with our staff to bolster that. That's being paid by the developer, honestly, through a cost recovery scheme. But the city of Miami, for example, I think it needs just really concerted focus by the leadership there to really turn that situation around. It can improve. And I think there are a lot of legacy, processes, even ones that, when I was in the administration 20 years ago that we shepherded, like the schedule for rezonings on a twice-a-year basis that I question really the wisdom of in retrospect, because that was intended to allow for more forward-looking planning by seeing a cohort of applications come in from a series of areas, and then have the city say, should we be looking at that area differently and reprogramming the zoning affirmatively? And that's really never happened, right? And so I would say then what's the wisdom of keeping that rule? Let's make it easier for people to come into the process and have that one-off conversation about whether something is appropriate or not and move on, right? So those are things that, nothing in life is static. Everything in life evolves. Circumstances change, and processes need to respond to those changing dynamics as well. And unfortunately, in some places in this town, we've been stuck in the same rut for a long time.
Well, and the ironic thing is that they all say, affordability is like the key word. It has been forever, but those permitting delays have a direct consequence on affordability, right? They play a huge role, especially if at the end of 18 months you might not even be approved, or on a much smaller scale with a small business, they might have on a lease 9 months of rent abatement, assuming that's the worst case, and a year and a half later, they still don't have all the permits in the construction, and they're underwater before they even open their doors for business. And I think that's a huge disservice to not only our tenants, but our communities who end up with vacant space for long periods of time and underutilized real estate for long periods of time.
Yeah, I think a related conversation is that a lot of the government systems operate in silos. Whether it's cities and counties, school districts, FDOT, Florida Housing Finance Corporation. I mentioned these because they all touch upon the built environment in some way. And so I think it's, we need to, as elected leaders, be more focused about leveraging each other towards common objectives. When I was a housing advocate, or even working at the city of Miami, it was incredibly frustrating that we were trying to target investment in certain neighborhoods, but we couldn't get a policy change at the state level of direct tax credit investment, right, into those same areas. So if you're trying to do a catalyst, you're creating a CRA, or you've got a Hope 6 grant, that's now outdated term, right, where you're trying to direct investment into an area, why can't the state come in and complement that investment with a directed tax credit allocation? You've got this arbitrary lottery, right? It doesn't really reward, so a lot of these systems don't dovetail with each other. Local priorities aren't reinforced in terms of regional investment by the counties and states. And so I think that's our challenge as local elected leaders. How can we kind of marshal those resources, those systems to better serve our local needs and priorities? Right now, they're operating on their own set of priorities. They're not integrated. And that's a byproduct of the fact that we're all just further and further disconnected, notwithstanding we live in a world of instant communication. Our systems still are very segmented, and there's a lot of opportunities that get missed. I was talking to a reporter recently about transportation issues, and I was remarking that, we can't find $1 billion to build rail in the Northeast Corridor, but we're going to rebuild the Palmetto for the third time in my lifetime, or fourth time in my lifetime, by spending over $1 billion on a segment from Northwest 25th Street down to Kendall Drive. So, why doesn't FDOT and the county's transit department talk to each other, right? And we're not talking about taking money out of a transportation silo. So if you're a road builder, right, you can build the same infrastructure, right? That's the conversation I had with the Florida Transportation Builders Association when I was a member. My priorities are continued infrastructure investment. Let's just think about where we want to direct that. But your constituents for that association are still going to build it, right? And the people who are designing those roadway enhancements are going to design these rail systems as well. So no one loses in this conversation, except the community when we are talking to each other about how we direct the investment in areas that generate the biggest return. And unfortunately, we're kind of an automatic pilot on a lot of these systems, and we're not questioning the outcomes. I question whether this Palmetto Expressway enhancement is really going to improve my commute substantially. Is it going to shave 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds? At the end of the day, does that really matter to me, right? Whereas if I could get on a ride where I don't have to be at the wheel, I can get to work efficiently and to still spend an hour, but spend an hour doing something else that either allows me to relax by reading a book or doing work, right? That makes me a better person or more productive. I mean, that's the conversation we should be having when we're talking about directing this kind of investment.
Agreed, 100%. And I really, really appreciate your time. I know we got a late start, but I want to be respectful that we had said 1 hour. I know you're super, super busy, and we really appreciate you being here. Is there anything that you want to say that we didn't get to touch upon, or a comment you want to make? I didn't get to ask about your favorite restaurants. I have several. I know you did say Pasta Mia, which is one of mine. There's also Plateau, which is an amazing Thai restaurant.
Plateau's been Yelp's #1 rated restaurant in Florida, so check them out. Look, we've got. I mean, look, I'm really excited about what's happening in South Miami, around the culinary side. Tokyo Tuna just opened up. Beautiful space, great food. Please check it out. Unfortunately, George Ramos, who's a treasure, had to shutter his restaurant in South Miami. But we are seeing. If you've not been to Mount Oliveira, check that out. That's a great place to go. Recoveco is a treasure as well. Great Babe, if you want a great local vibe, a great wine, fantastic. We've got a ton of staples like Old Lisbon and Pasta Mia, and obviously Deli Lane for breakfast. So many fantastic options in South Miami these days. We are very fortunate, and we're trying to do what we can to kind of change the reputation of the city as being a place that's not really welcoming of guests. We've had a very aggressive enforcement regime on parking. We've reduced the hours substantially, and we're trying to become a place where working with our social media team at the city, we're doing all that we can to kind of promote our local businesses, get them out there through events. So please check us out. We are a small city, limited resources. So if anybody has any ideas, wants to help us do an activation or a great idea that would bring more energy to this already fantastic place, we welcome your thoughts. And my cell phone's on the city's website, so feel free to give me a call or text. I'd love to interact with any and all of you to kind of make South Miami even better.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And
Jennifer, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
All righty. Have a great rest of your week.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mayor Fernandez. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We really appreciate your feedback and input, and for pulling up a chair and listening in. Until next time, say bye, Jennifer.
Bye, Jennifer.